Hello everyone, this is Surya from Document 360 team and I'm the co-organizer of today's webinar. First of all, thank you all for taking the time off from your busy schedule and joining the session. So today we have Mysti Berry, who's a technical writer from CrowdStrike with us to present the topic on how to center your customer content. So, to just give a quick intro, Misty has been a technical writer for several decades and has worked with Fortune organizations like Salesforce and 20th Century Fox. So she specializes in developer documentation, SaaS, and cybersecurity. So that's indeed a lot of experience. So you can expect some great insights from tonight's sessions. So by the end of today's session, I hope you'll be all able to discover various narrative techniques, used by novelists, screenwriters, and technical writers across the globe, to keep their customers engaged. So, Misty, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. So I have to give a safe harbor statement before I get started. The opinions and ideas expressed are mine, and they don't necessarily represent CrowdStrike. So you may be wondering, what do I even know about this topic of centering the customer? I have 3 decades as a technical writer. I've written screenplays that got awards but were never produced. I've written short stories, and I've published short stories that have been nominated for awards. And I was lucky enough to get my linguistics degree from UC Santa Cruz, which at that time was a top 5 undergraduate program. And over the years, I sort of put learnings together from all these areas to help me improve my technical documentation. And you may also be wondering, well, technical writers are naturally customer advocates. Isn't that enough? We empathize with the customer, we think about what's going to make their life easier, and we write our documentation, and that's always in our hearts. And that is definitely a big part of what makes a great technical writer. But there are also a few specific grammatical and structural techniques that I'll explain that will help your customer feel like they're the center of any process they read about. And this makes them feel valued as a customer, reduces cognitive dissonance, and reinforces your company's customer first orientation. That's a big promise for a few techniques, but we're going to check them out. So first I'll explain what I mean by centering. Then we'll look at specific word choice and sentence structure choices you can make. We'll briefly look at workflow diagrams because I am not the master of workflow diagrams, but I learned a couple things. And then we'll talk about structure, which is always the hardest thing to change when you have a big set of content. All right, so we're going to start with 3 examples. I pulled these off the internet. I did not write them, but they're out there. They're product documentation out there in the wild. And what I've done is bolded the grammatical subject. So if it's been a while since you diagrammed a sentence, this is just a little help to see what is the grammatical subject. And it also helps to know that in English, almost everything except the imperative requires a subject in the sentence. So it's always the most important thing in a sentence. All right, the first example, Oracle is the world's most popular database. And that's a great fact to know if you're going to buy Oracle, but we don't really see the customer in that sentence. And in the second one, managed and unmanaged drivers can be deployed easily. That's that passive construction that we try to avoid when we can. And again, the subject is the the company's software that they're selling to the customer. Customer is not really clearly here, although it's sort of implied. And then the third example, this article provides links. This is what is called self-referential text. And the subject, this article is all about the company providing the links, and the customer isn't really there at all. It's only implied that it's in the customer's best interest to download the JDK to use it. So if our customer isn't in these sentences, you might ask, well, is it hard or awkward, or does it use too many words, or does it feel really forced to change these to make the customer show up in the sentence? Turns out, no. We can easily change the first one to an imperative. Use Oracle, the world's most popular database, to get your jobs done. Or in the second example, we just insert the customer, make them the subject. You can easily deploy managed and unmanaged drivers. That's why you're going to buy our software or use it. And then in the third example, we get rid of that self-reference and just tell the customer what they need to know. Download the JDK, and the links would follow. Probably this would be maybe a colon in links, or there would be a list of links indented below that. But in each case, the customer is actually in the content. Now, you might say, hey, Mysti, I don't see the word you in that third example, or the first one. And that's because the imperative, the thing that we use to write tasks, click this link, etc., although it's not written on the page, it is understood by English speakers that the second person you is there in that sentence. So it's not implied, it's just not written down. That's a subtle difference, but it's important because whenever you read a task, you know someone is talking to you directly, and so that centers you. And what makes me think this is better? Well, I don't actually have metrics yet, but if you noticed, every single title but one of these slides literally had the word you in it. And as you think back over this introduction, did you have maybe a warm feeling or a valued feeling as we went through these slides, the way I focused the conversation on you? And I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments at the end. But that's the idea, is that that sort of warmer, if not warm feeling, is what we're going for. And when I was thinking about this, I realized one day that our job isn't actually to document software, although that's what we do all day long, and that's what's in our job titles as technical writers. Our job is to use words and images to help our customer on their journey through our software product. That's what I know about software. Through our software product to get back to their day job. Our job, sort of like Sisyphus in a certain way, is to get people in and out as fast as we can and to keep them centered in that journey. We're helping you solve your problems wherever possible. And it just so happens, as we're doing that, we end up documenting the software. So to summarize what you can do at the word and sentence level, put the customer in the sentence as the grammatical subject if you can. Now, you cannot write every sentence in your repo this way, but when you start looking for opportunities, you will see places where you can do that you just haven't yet because you weren't ever thinking about this before. And reference content, especially API reference, offers the fewest chances to do this. You don't want to artificially insert the customer in a table full of query parameters and data types and descriptions that aren't even full sentences. So don't be artificial about it. Don't go awkward. That's not the solution. But where it's possible, we want to do that. And we also noticed at a company where we were doing a lot with friendliness, is that friendliness and concision are sometimes at war. The more friendly you want to be in your content, the more words you may have to use. And so every writer has to make that choice. Is this the kind of content where I should cheat towards concision or I should cheat towards friendliness? So that's all about putting this customer in the grammatical subject of the sentence. And then avoid self-reflexive text. It's often easier to just write, this link gets you what you want, or this topic does blah, blah, blah. But if you say, oh, I'm not going to write self-reflexive text anymore, then you will find a more customer-centric way of introducing the topic or providing the links or whatever it is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about headings in the last section because headings are closely linked to structure. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. But now we're going to briefly dive into workflow diagrams, not architecture diagrams, which are a different creature, more like reference content often. But when you're trying to visually show the workflow that the customer has to go through or gets to go through, there's just a few things you can do. We are often tempted to start the workflow with the first thing that happens in time, and the workflow follows a time sequence. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, but it doesn't always center the user. It can end up centering our software because we're thinking about our software's part of the customer's journey. And I'm going to suggest and show examples instead that if you start the workflow with something that the customer cares about, or that is the customer, which is often the first step in the flow anyway. But if you start there, you will center the customer more. and then just a simple left versus right for English readers because we read left to right. And describing the workflow in terms of the customer's job to be done. And that's something we'll see in the last example in this section. And I'll explain more what that means. But these are the three things we're going to try to do for our workflow diagrams. And I'm going to start this section with not a great example. And I can say it's not a great example because I wrote it. I wrote it years ago, hoping to replace it with a better diagram. But that didn't happen because sometimes that doesn't happen. And so what's not great about this workflow? Well, the actual customer, which is a Salesforce admin, isn't in the diagram at all. So that's not great. The admin's customer, this nice lady with their cell phone, she's in it. So the customer's in it. So that's not bad. But notice how the workflow starts on the right, and you have to read every single word. You don't really get the flow from just the visual, but it starts on the right, not the left. And what the customer cares about isn't the first step, right? The Salesforce software is the first thing that you see if you know to read from right to left. So, and I think as you experience this graphic, you're like, oh, that was really hard, Misty. I have to really work hard to understand this diagram. And I'm sorry about that. A better example that I found in the wild, I didn't write this, I don't know, I haven't worked with Fivetran software, but it's one of their examples that's up on the internet. And it starts on the left, which is great. And it starts with the resource the customer probably cares most about, their data. And if you notice the slide, the sequence of events is not the first thing that happens in time is on the left in the first thing. They're like, hey, first our software has to trigger the replication, and then it goes through all the steps. But the most important thing in the diagram, the first thing, is what the customer cares about, their data, and then it shows up on the other end. So that's a much better workflow. And then I found an even better workflow from Asana, where they're talking about how to create workflow diagrams, and they illustrate it beautifully. Now, it just so happens that what the customer wants is the first thing in time. So that's great. But see how they literally say you're in the first two steps and in the last step. So the customer is very centered, and it's really simple. Pick a type of workflow, pick your endpoints, get the information you need, get rid of the information you don't need, and then build your workflow. So it's just a lovely, I felt like I could be successful with this software just from looking at this workflow diagram. And that's a great place for your customer to feel like, oh yeah, I see the road to success for my goal. And then just to summarize what we talked about, start the workflow from the customer's desk or the thing they care about. And if you're writing for English speakers, work left to right and describe the workflow in terms of the customer's job to be done. And I'm just going to bounce back for a minute. The customer knows they want to create a workflow diagram, or they wouldn't be looking at Asana software. So that is the job the customer wants to accomplish. And this difference can be subtle sometimes because companies create software to help people do their job. So sometimes it's the same. There's no difference between this part of the product and the customer's job to be done. But sometimes it is very different. And if we focus on their job to be done, we'll be able to write things in a nice order that is helpful and centers the customer. And you're probably tired of hearing that word center, but you're going to hear it a few more times. So the last part of this presentation is centering the customer by making specific structure choices. Now, all of us are probably familiar or have worked with a set of content where it was divided up more or less by the persona. So developer documentation is in one part, admin documentation is in another part, and the actual end user, if that's different from the admin, is in a third area. And the table of contents reinforces those differences by gathering the content all together. And that can be useful, and sometimes that's all you need to do. Sometimes you run into problems, though, because A developer task might actually be something that's in the UI. And so then you either have to link them over to the UI and get them back, or duplicate that content. If you have reuse, you could just reuse it. But sometimes the barriers between personas break down in terms of content, and it gets complicated. So if we're able to think about what the customer is trying to accomplish, we can center them in the structure a little better. And what does that mean exactly? Well, the first question is, does structure even matter in the modern world? You may find, if you look at your metrics, that somewhere between 50 and 80% of the first arrivals into your content come from Google or another search engine. And these days, with AI bots serving up content, that's sort of not navigation, but someone else getting your customer into your content, may happen even more. I don't know what the current day metrics are, but I expect that to be even greater. However, we know that if a customer isn't 100% successful getting exactly what they want on the first link they click from that search engine or AI bot, they may begin what's called information foraging in your content. And that means poking around in the navigation, like the table of contents or whatever navigation you give them, or searching internally. They may not go all the way back out to Google, although people often do. They may search around using your internal search engine. And if your internal search engine isn't great, then they may do even more hunting and pecking. So again, we're going to start with not the greatest example, although this is a very common pattern. You'll see it in a ton of content out there. But let's look at what's not so helpful, what's not centering the user. So the first thing to notice is a mixed taxonomy. And what do I mean like that? Well, we're going to ignore the word home, because that's a very special creature. It's like, oh, I'm lost, take me home so I can start over, right? So we're going to ignore that. But if you look at the word guides, pardon me, a guide is a type of deliverable. We think of it as a bound book almost, with a table of contents and an index. And while modern day guides may not have all those things, they imply a hefty set of topics all bundled together because they're a product or for whatever reason, right? So that's a content type, a content deliverable. Then the next choice, okay, so I can go poke around in guides, or I can look at stuff for developers. Now here is an actual persona word, and that's great, but a persona is very different from a content deliverable. So if you're a developer, like, do I click developers or do I click guides? Because you have no idea whether developer guides are under guides or under developers. Right? So that's, we have the content deliverable, and then we have the persona. And what's this third category? Integrations. Well, that's pretty close to a user goal or a user task. If you have a lot of data and you need to integrate it so you can process it and deliver a result to someone, that's a task. So, but a task isn't a persona, and a task isn't a content deliverable. So now we have three different taxonomies. And I'm like, oh, what if I'm developing integrations? Or what if I want a guide about integrations? Where do I click? And then the last thing is release notes, which is a content type, right? However it's delivered in HTML or in a console or in a PDF, it's a list of the changes usually by date, sometimes by product and then date. So that's a content type. So we have 4 different taxonomy categories, and it can be very confusing when you first look at this. You get that cognitive dissonance. And except for the developer and a little bit of the integration, the customer is really not there at all. So what could be better than that? Well, here's a landing page. It's not a navigation bar, it's a landing page. But if you notice the difference between the content on the under platform guide and the content under getting started, you can sort of see the customer showing up on the right-hand side. The left is a platform guide. Well, that's a content type in terms of the software platform versus a particular feature. And the things listed are, it's not really clear what the relationship of the user is to these items: activity, connection, data filter. But on the right, it starts with getting started, which is almost an imperative, right? But the task is really clear. Oh gosh, I'm new. I don't know anything. Please help me get started with this software, right? So the task is very clear. And the tasks down here are pretty clear too. They're not exactly a user goal. Like no user wakes up in the morning saying, oh, I really got to create me some inputs today. But it's pretty clear that if you have a bunch of data, you'll have to create the pipe. Then you'll have to identify the data that's going to go into the pipe. Then you have to pick a place for the pipe to deliver that data, and so on. So we're getting there with this example. But there might be an even better way to center the customer in your structure. And again, this is a landing page and not a navigation bar or a table of contents. But this navigation page has imperatives for 2/3 of it. And not only that, but the really big headings, the customers explicitly, how can segment help you? Now, the you isn't the grammatical subject, but the you is there. Like, here I am, I want to help you. And that's pretty good. And then all of the headings are imperatives. And they're things the customer wants to accomplish, not what they have to do in the software to accomplish what they want to accomplish. But in simplified data collection, who wouldn't want to do that? Respecting my users' privacy, I'm all about that, right? It gets a little software-y towards the bottom. We get back to these nouns that don't necessarily reflect the or center the user, sorry. But for 2/3 of this lovely landing page, the customer is right in the center of what's going on. All right. So this is a summary, but also there's a couple new ideas in here, and I apologize for that. I needed to fix my own structure. But in general, structuring the content around the customer's jobs to be done will be the most helpful. It keeps them centered. It lets them know where to start, which journeys to choose, and they don't have to do any sort of math in the head, like, oh, I'm a developer, I better go here, or oh, I need a guide, I better go here. And often a product name or a feature name, it might not be 100% clear how that maps to the customer's goals until after they read the content. So using the vocabulary where you can of the customer's jobs to be done is the most centering thing. Now, I want to, as an aside, just acknowledge that this phrase jobs to be done is a concept that I believe came from product marketing, but it applies really well to our content as well, our product content. Another thing to try to do is to keep your top level nodes, that first example we walked through, within a single taxonomy. If you got to pick content type, then pick content type. If you want to structure around persona or user goal, do that, but be really consistent, with the exception, of course, of things like the home button, which is a help, I want to get started again sort of thing. But aside from those exceptions, for the main set of content you have, try to pick a single taxonomy. And that just reduces, it may not center the customer over the other approaches, but it reduces that cognitive dissonance and will pay off. Now, when I say all this, I want to acknowledge that very few companies are able to do a complete restructure of their content from the top all the way down. That's a very expensive enterprise, and you have to manage, everybody has their links and their current knowledge of how the content is structured, so you don't want to break existing customers' experiences. So this can be very time intensive to take on. But if your structure is so broken that you know customers are failing, one way that you can persuade people that this is a project worth investing money in is to invite them to accomplish a task using only the product documentation. And once they feel the customer's pain, they're like, oh yeah, we should really fix this. And then if there still isn't money for that project, you can say, hey, we can mitigate this by providing really great landing pages, like the example from the segment documentation. So structure is hard to fix, but there are workarounds and there are arguments you can make if you're in a position to do that. So the overall summary of all the things we've looked at is you can create a style guide to recommend the best word and sentence choices at the word and sentence level. You can make sure your workflows follow all the ideas about how to center the customer and make the workflow easy to read, easy to scan. And you can structure your content around jobs to be done or whatever taxonomy you choose, making that taxonomy consistent. And if you can't change your structure, you can create landing pages that will be helpful. And the success of those landing pages will themselves serve as an argument that, hey, this is a structure that people really respond to. And I just wanted to give one example of centering the customer. Years ago, I stayed for the first time at a Virgin hotel. It was in Chicago. And before I arrived, as part of the booking process, they're like, oh, what's your favorite snack? What's your favorite soda pop? And I told them, and those things were waiting for me along with a sweet little card when I arrived. And to this day, I still look and see if this chain is available in the city I'm going to from that one $2 gesture, because it made me feel like I was the center of our interaction. And while we can't provide potato chips and soda pop to our customers, we can make it as easy as possible for them to get their jobs done and let them know that they're the center of our world in the structure as well as in our hearts. I think the webinar folks are going to make this available as a PDF, but you can also go to my website. I'm not selling you anything. This is just my fiction writer's website, and I put a secret page in there so you can download these slides. And if you download the slides, then you can, or the PDF, you can learn more about information foraging and the scent of information, which I find fascinating. There's the fuller example of the segment landing page alongside their navigation, which was pretty much their org chart, pretty much their list of products. So you can compare the different, how you feel when you read their landing page versus when you're plowing through the navigation. There's also a primer on content architecture that I found really useful, and a primer on this whole concept of jobs to be done that you can follow up with.
Yeah, thank you, Mysti.
I think all the insights shared from this session will be staying in the audience heart for quite some time.
And on behalf of the entire Document 360 team, I thank everyone who joined this session today. So as Mysti shared in the past, the entire session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our website soon in case you want to come back and see it. And I'd just like to add a quick word that Document 360 is a knowledge-based platform that can help you build the customer-centric documentation that you're looking out for. So hope it did not sound like a sales pitch as it did in my mind.
Not at all.
Okay, so thank you all. So we'll be back again with another session soon, and I wish you all have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you, Mysti. Thank you, everybody.